parties will have to decide whether to extend it for another 16 years or basically go year to year.
This is an interesting turn of events. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got Mark Carney getting grilled by an independent senator who was on the NAFTA Council in preparation for the CUSMA renegotiation. We've also got an international lawyer who's taken a couple jabs at Mark Carney here too. Let's jump into this. Starting this episode off, we've got this article from the Hill Times here. It says, most dangerous period we've been in. Carney urged to bolster Team Canada approach ahead of CUSMA review. So he's getting a warning here from a senator that's basically calling him out that he's unprepared. Now, before we dive into that, we've got an interview here with an international lawyer that calls it out straight why Carney's not getting a deal. And to recap, with around $62 billion of net outflow of money going from Canada to America and other places, we've got this segment here on CTV Your Morning, why Canada can't get a tariff deal.
Hey, my friends, welcome back to Your Morning. Now, the global trade war launched by U.S. President Donald Trump loomed large over 2025.
Much of this success has been accomplished by tariffs. My favorite word, tariffs, which for many decades have been used successfully by other countries against us, but not anymore.
From Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs on more than 180 countries to stalled talks between Canada and the United States, this year saw an overhaul of how many nations do business with each other and especially with the U.S. For a look back at how tariffs shaped 2025, we're joined by Mark Warner, international trade expert and lawyer. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So before he even returned to the White House, before his inauguration in January, Trump said he'd impose new tariffs on Canada. Looking back at 2025, has the president's trade actions matched yours and other experts' expectations?
Well, I think he was serious about it. I think everyone knew that. We just didn't know, I guess, the extent to which he was prepared to go with it and how across the board it would be. I think he's also pulled back in some ways after the stock market fell earlier with the Liberation Day tariffs. So I think it's been it's been a bit of a warning, but it's not over yet. And clearly tariffs are a big part of his agenda and will stay there for as long as he's president.
Yeah, not over yet, indeed. So the U.S. halted trade talks with Canada in October, partially over Ontario's anti-tariff ad that ran in the U.S. Meanwhile, China, the European Union,
one that Mark Carney saw and approved,
and United Kingdom, Japan, they've all reached trade agreements with the U.S. this year. So why has it been so challenging for us to also get a deal?
Well, we already have an agreement, so which is the CUSMA or the USMCA, and a lot of trade is actually crossing the border. As long as it's compliant with the terms of the USMCA rules of origin, they're not being tarified is the phrase that everyone's using. So in a sense, we are where those other countries ended up. It's important to note that
But we have to remember we have more trade with America than any other country on earth, I believe, or like number two. Maybe Mexico has more. So looking at it, it's 17-17. So we're tied with Mexico at 17%. He can't use that argument because all these other countries here don't have as much trade aside from Mexico. They're the only ones who can make the argument, I guess. The deal matters more with America, with Canada and Mexico, as this is a far bigger proportion of our trade.
None of those countries got rid of all of their trade disputes with the United States. Many of them just put them aside to be negotiated later, like digital taxes in the case of the UK, steel in the case of the UK, and other issues as well. So we're in a fairly similar position. I think the difference is Canada has adopted a more bellicose attitude around the trading relationship, more of a feeling that our pride has been hurt, more indignant, where I think a lot of other countries have adopted a more pragmatic approach, both than we have under either Prime Minister Trudeau or under Prime Minister Carney.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's a very good point there. Basically, elbows up crew, Mark Carney, fear-mongering Canadians, trying to inject emotion into this versus trying to come to a logical conclusion, coming to an agreement, making concessions on both sides. Donald Trump will make some concessions. We'll have to make more to make a deal, but he would get to a deal because he would rather just this be done with than having to keep dealing with Canada. He's getting annoyed of it. He's dealing with multiple conflicts around the world. He's dealing with Venezuela, dealing with Russia, and still dealing with Gaza. The chips and hummus crew have refused refused to give up their pow-pows, and now Trump's starting to get a little irritated over there as well, not to mention Nigeria launching a strike there. When it comes down to it, Canada has to get a deal with America. We've got Canada capital flow here, as in money flowing into Canada, which is blue, or flowing out of Canada, which is this light yellow color. And as we found out this year, around $62 billion of capital fleeing Canada. That's what this is. We're looking at just the last 5 years here. Looking at the last 10 years, you can see the drop here is very dramatic. While America exports 17% of their goods to Canada, Canada's exporting 77% of our goods to America. So you can see they're not exactly hurting to get a deal with us. It hurts them a bit, but not like it hurts us. Now, further looking at this article here, we've got independent Senator Hassan Yousaf, Ontario, a member of Carney's Council on Canada-US Relations, said that Canada was better prepared and more united during the previous renegotiations of NAFTA. So he was a part of this renegotiation of NAFTA, so he knows firsthand here. So we've got multiple quotes. This is the guy here. They go on to talk about how all parties became united for this to get this deal done with America, with Donald Trump. They mention Andrew Scheer here, and they remark that he wouldn't highlight differences between the parties while in the US, but instead spotlight the differences of the trade pact. Goes on to say people saw this as an effort for the country, and we ought to not play partisan politics in regards to what we are doing, Yousaf said in 2018. Yousaf also said the elements are there this time around, but the government has more to do to unite them. And we know this because Mark Carney isn't even trying to work with the other parties. He's just trying to steal people from other parties to get a majority government. He doesn't want to make any concessions whatsoever. Yousaf said that opposition parties have been taking swipes at the government rather than trying to be united. He also remarked that Carney needs to do more and bring opposition leaders together and bring them on board. He has to have more dialogue with them about the challenges the country is going to face. Mark Carney doesn't care about that. We see this. He's not even trying. Yousaf goes on to say the first 6 months in the new year are going to be very difficult for this country with uncertainty of not knowing where this is going. And that is the truth of it. We have no idea how this is going to affect Canada, because if CUSMA falls apart and Donald Trump puts tariffs on our food, a lot of food, not all food, but a lot of food will go up in price, and this will be miserable for us. And the reason for that is likely that Mark Carney would put retaliatory tariffs on food, and then we would have to pay that price. Because if we didn't have CUSMA, then Trump would likely tariff food going into America as well, coming out of Canada or Mexico. This is what I'm guessing, because Mark Carney already put retaliatory tariffs on sporting goods and a whole bunch of stuff that he later dropped. He didn't hesitate to do that already. Yousaf goes on to say, this time around with this president is probably the most dangerous period that we've been in. Says one of the forums that helped build unity among partisan lines was the NAFTA Advisory Council, and he goes on to criticize Carney here for essentially not even bothering to have any meetings. Yousaf says the current formation of the council isn't actively holding meetings, remarking that he can't remember the last time they had met. I believe that the Prime Minister can benefit enormously from the talent around the council, and he can add voices that believes is missing going forward. He said there's been a weakness by the government in not showing heft and commitment in bringing those groups together. He says the government should recognize Team Canada approach has worked tremendously well for the country, and that they've got to get on it. This is some pretty critical stuff here coming from this senator who was a part of NAFTA before, calling out Carney that he's unprepared for these renegotiations. What's the clincher here? This senator, you can see in his biography, Mr. Yousaf here served on the Canada NAFTA Council as well as the Sustainable Development Advisory Council. This is one of Mark Carney's guys. At least he's in the same ballpark as Mark Carney, and he's criticizing Mark Carney.
Sometimes talk of tariffs and trade wars can feel a little bit academic, but lots of real-world impacts. This year, Stellantis announcing it's moving production from Ontario to Illinois. Algoma Steel just this month said it's laying off 1,000 workers in Sault Ste. Marie, and the list goes on. So how much of a bite are tariffs taking out of our economy, and how much kind of real-world impact for folks are they having?
So I think that when we had the so-called counter tariffs, obviously we saw, I think, some price hits. But that was largely self-imposed, because those are tariffs that Canada put in retaliation for the American tariffs. Those have mostly been lifted now, and so that price effect has gone down. But obviously we're seeing it in certain of the sectors like steel, aluminum, autos are mainly affected by it. So folks in those industries are seeing it. Softwood lumber has been the subject of American tariffs since before I went to law school. They have new ones, they have higher ones. So, that's not exactly new. In some cases, I think we know the way to get out of these tariffs, or at least experts do. There's a question whether anybody, when Canada was prepared to to make any of the kind of concessions that would make them go away. You know, it's interesting to know.
He's just calling out Mark Carney here. That's what he just did. He called out Carney and said, you need to make concessions. We all know what it is. He laughed when he said it. Look at him having a laugh here. He knows full well it's supply management, digital service tax, all that kind of stuff. But really, it's supply management. That's the problem here.
Oh, when you look at some of the other countries like the United Kingdom that were able to do a deal on autos, or even Japan and Korea, they did a deal by basically giving a little bit of what Trump wanted to him. We have so far refused to do that. And basically a consequence of that is we are getting hammered in some of those sectors where the prime minister says, no deal is better than a bad deal. Other countries have said, I'll take a bad deal as opposed to a no deal.
Right.
And that's just it. Mark Carney is part of his brand. Fear-mongering Canadians, rupture, dangerous and divided world, even on Christmas. Oh, dangerous and uncertain world. He has to say that even on Christmas, without a Merry Christmas, by the way. Only a happy holidays from Mark Carney. Now let's look at this one here. Canada balance of trade. This is the money coming in of Canada and the money going out. This is the goods we're selling to the world and goods we're buying from the world. This is not a simple graph. You can just straight look at it like this and get an idea of what's going on. There's other factors here you have to consider, but what we're looking at here is the Trudeau years, 2016, just barely past when Trudeau started till today, 2025. We look at this area here. We have a bunch of blue, which means we were selling more than we were buying, which sounds like it's good. This is not as clear as it looks here. This is not actually a great thing. And then most the rest of the time here is net outflow, which also doesn't paint a crystal clear picture. So to break this down, what happened here, 2022? Very clear what happened. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. And what happened? Oil prices went through the roof. As we see on this chart here, crude oil. And as I said, the price of oil spiked as soon as Russia went into Ukraine, because that oil was no longer being sold to the world from Russia, as they're a major producer, one of the top sources of oil in the world. And what did that do for Canada? It made our oil more valuable. We were making more money with it. It didn't mean we were setting up a new pipeline and suddenly this spiked as soon as the pipeline opened and we passed legislation, we built a pipeline, great for Canada. No, that's not what happened. It just Russia invaded, and that's why we were making more money here. That's why it doesn't paint a crystal clear picture of the economy, because there's external factors. So while we did make more money here, we were exporting more goods than we were buying. It's only because of that invasion. So it's not really a great thing. You would want to see this blue because we are building data AI centers. We're building our own automotive industry, or building more pipelines, more nuclear reactors, whatever it may be. Really, this was just from the conflict. That's it. And what we have here today is a massive deficit of spending. If we look at it closer here, the Liberals didn't build the pipelines. They built a bunch of EV facilities that all went out of business or downsized or moved to America. Only way having a deficit like this could be good is if it's what the Liberals argue. Oh, we have to spend more, to invest more, to make more for Canada. But that doesn't work unless you're investing in things that will make money. They want to invest in carbon capture. We can't sell the end product. Why would we invest in that? If we were investing in factories, say 50 or 100 years ago, embroidery machines or something like that, then that would make a lot of money. And then today that would be AI data centers, nuclear pipelines, whatever it may be, stuff today that will make money and will get the return 10x, 15x down the road. But it's a flashy socialist kind of view where you spend a bunch of money and then you get those big returns. It doesn't work out. What's better is just reduce the taxes, make the environment very investable for companies around the world, and the companies will come in and start businesses. The Liberals and the NDP want to spend a bunch of money to boost an economy, boost a certain sector. And while technically this can work, one example might be Swiss watches coming out of Switzerland. They had to come up with an industry they could dominate. They chose watches back in the day. But in reality, how the Swiss did it wasn't through taxpayer money. It was actually allowing the private sector to come in and build those companies to do it. They did add some regulations, some guidelines that ensured high quality parts for all the watches, had strict export regulations. They protected the market and protected the quality, but they didn't use taxpayer money. They used the private enterprise system to do it. So really, I'm sure there are some examples of a country dumping taxpayer money into an industry and then it does work out. But in general, it's a bad strategy because government is awful at running businesses. Now, to give you one example of where this did work out, the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, the government put a lot of money into universities, into research, into tax incentives to corner this market and dominate it. And today they have 90% of this market. It can work out if you have a lot of smart people who do just the right thing and the industry doesn't rely on ongoing money over and over. It has to be done very deliberately, but it's too risky and politicians are terrible at this. That's why it's such a bad idea. And the perfect example is the EV industry in Canada. just completely imploded after billions of dollars were dumped into it.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. And obviously a big part of this is CUSMA, our trade deal with the U.S. and Mexico, used to be known as NAFTA, but CUSMA is up for review next year. How do you think talks are going to go? What do you think could be the outcome of this?
So when the NAFTA was transformed into CUSMA, the Americans basically wanted to put a finite limit on it, that it would expire at a certain point, and we had a compromise. And the compromise is that on basically July 1st of next year, interesting choice of dates, the parties will have to decide whether to extend it for another 16 years or basically go year to year. I personally don't think there's any scope for the Donald Trump, given what we know of his style of negotiation, will extend it for another 16 years. So the best I think we can get out of it is an annual review.
I agree with this guy. I don't think Donald Trump's going to agree to 16 years. There's no way. He's going to want to keep that leverage year after year after year. He can keep squeezing Canada every single year. That's going to be his style of doing it.
And it'll be interesting to see how Mr. Carney reacts to that, whether he dumps the whole agreement if he can't get the 16-year extension. That's going to be tough. I think we know the issues. Dairy's always there. There's some issues on digital services that are still outstanding issues for the Americans. And then there's a lot of perennial issues. I think the biggest issue perhaps, and the hardest one for Canada, is the Americans will be looking for some form of a sort of integration of our markets with respect to third countries. And by that, I mean China. And so we've gone part of the way on that on autos and part of the way on that on steel. But I think the Americans will be looking for a much broader agreement of Canada and Mexico to adhere to its approach to dealing with China. And that's going to be interesting to see how Mr. Carney can deal with that, given his attempts to reach out to China.
Yeah, I think he's right here. So there's not going to be a bilateral agreement with Mexico and Canada. Trump's going to do two individual deals. He's going to want to try to force both countries not to allow Chinese steel, for example, to flood into their countries or our country, Mexico or Canada, and then into America. They're trying to prevent all of that. So the best way to control that is just to have individual agreements. And if one of the countries doesn't agree, like say Carney's like, no, we're not going to do that. Well, he can still do that with Mexico and still have a good deal there. And then we get screwed over or whatever it may be. Seems Mexico's much more willing to work with Donald Trump. Carney's still holding out because he needs to fearmonger for the majority. He doesn't care about Canada. It's all about getting a majority to roll out his Brookfield agenda here, and he's hanging out Canadians to dry in the process. Going back to the start of this, like 60 some odd billion dollars has fled Canada here in capital down to America and other countries since Mark Carney became prime minister, and that's what we're looking at here. This is Canada foreign direct investment. Now, while this chart shows a bunch of money coming into Canada, this is $42 billion, $29 billion. A lot of companies like to store their money, their profits in Canada. They park it here because of our corporate laws, our rules, but they're not necessarily using that money to start businesses. They just like our corporate tax structure and our legal structure. We've got this here in Canada industrial production over the past 5 years, and you can see at one point it was above zero, and now fast forward to the past year here, and we're seeing a bunch below zero. Minus 1.9% is the latest statistics here from October 2025. If we go back to 2024 here, we can see there was plus 41 billion in the energy sector, advanced manufacturing plus 19 billion. We have this chart here directly from the government's website, foreign direct investment in Canada by select ultimate and intermediate investor countries. And you can see most of it, United States, companies and investors from America dumping money into Canada. You can see here, $762 billion just from America alone. We got this one here, Canada foreign investment. We've got 2022, 23, and 24 here. So FDI inward flow, foreign direct investment. This is money from outside of Canada invested, and you can see this is 45, this is in millions, so 1,000 millions, which is billions, so $45 billion, $46 billion in 2023, and $64 billion in 2024. FDI stock, foreign direct stock, this is the total value of foreign assets in Canada, and once again, this is in millions, which is $1.8 trillion. And you'll notice down here, we've got main investing countries, and 51.3% is from the United States. No matter how the elbows up crew wants to say it, we are highly integrated and woven in with the United States. There's no way to get around this. I mean, we can spend next 2 or 3 decades trying to invest more in other countries, but America is still going to be a major part of Canada going forward. And we've got this one, main invested sectors, management of companies and enterprises. As I said, a lot of big companies moving their headquarters or taking advantage of Canada's tax laws, and we've got 33% in management and companies, and then next is 17% in manufacturing. Finance and insurance, 11%, 7% and goes down from there. Now, while Canada is not the most competitive in the OECD regarding our corporate taxes, we're slightly over average. I believe it's around 23% is average OECD, and depend on which province, it's like 25, 26%. We're a little bit higher than America as well. Canada offers a stable legal system as well as one of the best tax treaties in the world, making it easier for companies who want to do global business with a headquarters in Canada. So even with the higher tax rates, they'd make up the difference with less regulations and easier business dealings in multiple countries around the world. Our treaty and tax system is very enticing for corporations who want to store their cash here, pay out dividends, royalties. It drops those rates down, as well as a stable banking system here. They're essentially reaping the benefits without investing in Canada.